animal pills. At this point, George suddenly had an extra good wits. Although the medicine cupboards in the house was forbidden ground, what about the medicine his father kept on his shelf in the shed next to the hen house? The animal medicines? What about those? Nobody had ever told him he mustn't touch them. Let's face it, George said to himself. Hairspray and shaving creams and shoe polish are all very well, and they will no doubt cause the splendid explosion made inside the old greaser. But what the magic mixture now need is a touch of a real stuff, real pills and real tonics, to give it punch and muscles. George picked up the heavy 3/4 full saucepan and carried out of the back door. He crossed the farmyard and headed straight for the shed alongside the hen house. He knew his father wouldn't be there. He was out haymaking in one of the meadows. George entered the dusty old shed and put the saucepan on the bench. Then he looked up at the medicine shelf. There were 5 big bottles there. 2 were full of pills, 2 were full of runny stuff, and 1 was full of powder. I used them all, George says. Grandma needs them. Boy, does she need them. The first bottle he took down contained an orange color powder. The label said, for chicken with foul pest, hen grips, sore beaks, gammy legs, crockerlets, eggs troubled, brownless, or loss of feathers. Mixed 1 spoonful only with each bucket of feed. Well, George said aloud to himself as he tipped the whole bottleful, the old bird won't be losing any feathers after she had a dozen of this. The next bottle he took down had about 500 gigantic purple pills in it, for horses with horse throats. It said on the label, the horse-throated horse should suck 1 pill twice a day. Grandma may not have a horse throat, George said, but she certainly got a sharp tongue. Maybe they'll curl that instead. Into the saucepan went the 500 gigantic purple pills. Then there was a bottle of thick yellowish liquid for cows, bulls, and bullocks. The label says, will cure cowpox, cow mange, crumple horns, bad breath in bulls, itch, toothache, headache, huffache, tailach, and sore uppers. The grumpy old cow in the living room has every one of those rotten illnesses, George said. She'll need them all. Need it all. With a sob of gurgle, the yellow liquid splashed into the now nearly full saucepan. The next bottle contained a brilliant red liquid. Sheep dip, it said on the label, for sheep with sheep rot and for getting rid of tricks and fleas. Mix 1 spoonful in 1 gallon of water and splash it over the sheep. Caution, do not make the mixture any stronger or the wool will fall out and the animal will be nagged. By gum, said George, how I love to walk in the slush, it all over old Grandma and watch the ticks and fleas go jumping off her. But I can't, I mustn't, so she'll have to drink it instead. He poured the bright red medicine into the saucepan. The last bottle on the shelf was full of pale green pills. Pig pills, the label announced, for pigs with pork prickles, tender trotters, bristle bright, and swing sickness, give 1 pill per day. In several cases, 2 pills may be given, but more than that will make the pig rock and roll. Just the stuff, said George, for that miserable old pig back there in the house. She'll need a very big dose. He tipped all the green pills, hundred of them, into the saucepan. There was an old stick lying on the bench that had been used for stirring paint. George picked it up and started to stir his marvelous concoction. The mixture was as thick as cream, and he stirred. And as he stirred and stirred, many wonderful colors rose up from the dust and blended together, pinks, blue, green, yellow, and browns. George went on stirring until it was all well mixed, but even there were still hundreds of pills lying on the bottom that hadn't melted. There was his mother's splendid powder stuff floating on the surface. I shall have to boil it all up, George said. 1 good quick boil in the stove is all it needs. And with that, he started back toward the house with the enormous heavy saucepan. On the way, he passed the garage, so he went in to see if he could find any other interesting things. He had the following: half a pinch of engine oil to keep Grandma's engine going smoothly, some antifreeze to keep her radiator from freezing up in winter, a handful of grease to grease her cracking joints, then back to the kitchen. The cook-up. In the kitchen, George put the saucepan on the stove and turned on the gas flame underneath it as high as it would go. George, came an awful voice from the next room. It's time for my medicine. Not yet, Grandma, George called back. There is still 20 minutes before 11 o'clock. What mischief are you up to in there now? Granny squeaked. I hear noises. George thought it best not to answer this one. He found a long wooden spoon in the kitchen drawer and began stirring hard. The stuff in the pot got hotter and hotter. Soon the marvelous mixture began to flush and form. A rich blue smoke, a color of peacocks, rose from the surface of the liquid, and the thoroughly some smell from in the kitchen. It made George cough and sputtered. It was a smell unlike any he had smelled before. It was a brutal and bewitching smell, spicy and sputtering, fierce and sprinkled full of wizardry and magic. Whenever he got a whiff of it up his nose, firecrackers went off in his skull and electric puckles ran along the back of his legs. It was wonderful to stand there stirring this amazing mixture and to watch it smoking blue and bubbling and frothing and forming as though it were alive. At one point, he could have sworn he saw bright sparks flash in the swirling form. And suddenly, George found himself dancing around the steaming pot, chanting strange words that came into his head out of nowhere. Fursey broth and witch's blows, Fermi forth and witch's blue. Form and spoon drifts play, pray. Frizzle, squizzle about hurried. Watches slushing, swashing, slushing. Here it's hissing, squashing, spissing. Grandma better start to pray. Brown paint. George turned off the heat under the saucepan. He must leave plenty of time for it to cool down. When all the steams and force had gone away, he peered into the giant pan to see what color in the great medicine now was. It was a deep and brilliant blue. It needed more brown in it, George said. It simply must be brown or she'll get suspicious. George ran outside and dashed into his father's toolish while all the paints were kept. There was a row of cans on the shelf, all colored, black, green, red, pink, white, and brown. He reached for the can of brown. The label said quick, simply, dark brown glass paints, 1 quart. He took a screwdriver and praised off the lid. The can was 3/4 full. He rushed it back to the kitchen. He poured a whole lot into the saucepan. The saucepan was now full of the brim. Very gently, George stirred and painted into the mixture with a long wooden spoon. Aha! It was all turning brown. A lovely, rich, creamy brown. Where's that medicine of mine, boy? Came the voice from the living room. You're forgetting me. You're doing it on purpose. I shall tell your mother. I'm not forgetting you, Grandma, George called back. I'm thinking of you all the time, but there are still 10 minutes to go. You're a nasty little maggot, the boy's voice screeched back. You're a lazy, disobedient little worm, and you're growing too fast. George fetched a bottle of Grandma's real medicine from the sideboard. He took out the cork and tipped it all around the sink. He then filled the bottle with his own magic mixture by dipping a small jug into the saucepan and using it as a porter. He replaced the cork. Had it cooled down enough yet? Not quite. He held the bottle under the cold tap after a couple of minutes. The label came off in the wet, but that didn't matter. He dried the bottle with a dishcloth. All was now ready. This was it. The great moment had arrived. Medicine time, Grandma, he called out. I should hope so, too, came the grumpy reply. The silver teaspoon in which the medicine was always given lay on the kitchen sideboard. George picked it up. Holding the spoon in one hand and the bottle in the other, he advanced into the living room. Grandma guessed the medicine. Grandma sat hunched in her chair by the window. The weak little eyes followed George closely as he crossed the room toward her. You're late, she snapped. I don't think I am, Grandma. Don't interrupt me in the middle of the sentence, she shouted. But you finished your sentence, Grandma. There you go again, she cried. Always interrupting and arguing. You really are the tiresome little boy. What's the time? It's exactly 11 o'clock, Grandma. You're lying as usual. Stop talking so much and give me my medicine. Shake the bottle first. Then pour it into the spoon and make sure it's a whole spoonful. Are you going to gulp it all down in one go? George asked her. Will you sip it? Or will you sip it? What I do is none of your business, the old woman said. Fill the spoon. As George removed the cork and began very slowly to pour the thick brown stuff into the spoon, he couldn't help thinking back upon all the mad and marvelous things they had gone into the making of this crazy stuff. The shaving soap, the hair remover, the drop clear, the automatic washing machine powder, the flea powder for dogs, the shoe polish, the black pepper, the horseless, and all of the rest of them, not to mention the powerful animal pills and powder and liquid, and the brown paint. "Open your mouth wide, Grandma," he said, "and I'll pop it in." The old hag opened her small wrinkled mouth, showing the disgusting pale brown teeth. "Here we go," George cried out. "Swallow it down." He pushed the spoon well into her mouth and spit the mixture down her throat. Then he stepped back towards the resort. It was worth watching. Grandma yelled, "Whee!" and her body shot up whoosh into the air. It was exactly as though someone had pushed an electric wire through the underneath of her chair and switched on the current. Up she went like a jack in the box, and she didn't come down. She stayed there, suspended in the midair, about 2 feet up, still in the sitting positions, but regrets now frozen, quivering, the eyes sparkling, the hair standing straight up on end. "Is something wrong, Grandma?" George asked her politely. "Are you all right?" Suspended up there in the space, the old girl was beyond speaking. The shock that George's marvelous mixture had given her must have been tremendous. "You have thought she'd swallow the red-hot poker the way she took off from the chair." Then down she came again with a plop, back to her seat. "Call the fire brigade," she shouted suddenly. "My stomach's on fire." "It's just the medicine, Grandma," George said. "It's good strong stuff." "Fire!" the old woman yelled. "Fire in the basement! Get a bucket! Man those hoses! Do something quick!" "Cool it, Grandma," George said, but he got a bit of a shock when he saw the smoke coming out of her mouth and out of her nostrils. Clouds of black smoke were coming out from her nose and blowing around the room. "By golly, you are on fire," George said. "Of course I'm on fire," she yelled. "I'll be burned to a crisp. I'll be fried into frizzle. I'll be boiled like a beetroot." George ran into the kitchen and came back with a jug of water. "Open your mouth, Grandma," he cried. He could hardly see her for a smoke, but he managed to pour half a jugful down her throat. A sizzling sound, the kind you get if you hold the hot fry pans under the cold tap, came up from deep down in Grandma's stomach. The old hag bucked and shied and snorted. She gasped and gurgled. Sprout of water came shooting down out of her. Then the smoke cleared away. "The fire's out," George announced proudly. "You'll be all right now, Grandma." "All right?" she yelled. "Who's all right? There's Jackie jumpers in my tummy. There's squitters in my belly. There's a banger in my bottom." She began bouncing up and down in the chair. Quite obviously, she was not very comfortable. You'll find it's doing you a lot of good." "What medicine, Grandma?" George said. "Good?" she screamed. "Doing me good? It's killing me." Then she began to burp. She was squalling. She was puffing up all over. Someone was pumping her up. That's how it looked. Was she going to explode? Her face turned from purple to green. But wait, she had a puncture somewhere. George could hear the hiss of escaping air. He stopped swelling. She was going down. She was slowly getting thinner again. Shrinking back and back slowly to her shrivelly old self. "How's things, Grandma?" George said. No answer. Then the funny things happened. Grandma's body gave a sudden sharp twist and the sudden sharp jerk, and she flipped herself clear out of the chair and landed neatly on her 2 feet on the carpet. That's terrific, Grandma, George cried. You hadn't stood up like that for years. Look at you. You are standing up all on your own, and you're not even using a stick. Grandma didn't even hear him. The frozen, pop-eyed look was back with her again now. She was miles away in another world. Marvelous medicine, George thought himself. He found fascinating to stand there watching what it was doing in the old hag's. What next? He wondered. He soon found out. Suddenly she began to grow. It was quite slowly at first, just a very gradual inching upwards, up, inch by inch, getting taller and taller, about an inch every few seconds. And then in the beginning, George didn't notice it, but when she had passed the 5'6" mark and was going up toward the begin 6 feet tall, George gave a jump and shouted, "Hey, Grandma, you're growing! You're going up! Hang on, Grandma! You'd better stop now or you'll be hitting the ceiling!" But Grandma didn't stop. It was truly fantastic sight. This ancient, scrawny old woman getting taller and taller, longer and longer, thinner and thinner, as though she were a piece of elastic being pulled upward by invisible hands. When the top of her head actually touched the ceiling, George thought he was bound to stop. But she didn't. There was a sort of scrunching noise, and bits of plaster and cement came raining down. Haven't you better stop now, Grandma? George said. Daddy's just had this whole room repainted. But there was no stopping her now. Soon her head and shoulder had completely disappeared through the ceiling, and she was still going. George dashed upstairs to his own bedroom, and there she was coming up through the floor like a mushroom. "Whoopee!" she shouted, finding her voice at last. Hallelujah! Here I come. "Steady on, Grandma," George said, with a high nonny no, and up we go. She shouted. "Just watch me grow. This is my room," George said. Look at the mess you're making." Terrific medicine," she cried. "Give me some more." "She's dotty as a donut," George thought. "Come on, boy, give me some more," she yelled. "Dash it out, I'm slowing down." George was still clutching the medicine bottle in one hand and the spoon in the other. "Oh, well," he thought, "why not?" He poured out a second dose and popped it into her mouth. "Whee!" She screamed, and up she went again. Her feet were still on the floor downstairs in the living room, but her head was moving quickly toward the ceiling of the bedroom. "I'm on the way now, boy," she called down to George. Just watch me go. That's the attic above you, Grandma," George called out. "I'd keep out of there. It's full of bugs and boils." Crash! The old girl's head went through the ceiling as though it was butter. George stood there in the bedroom gazing at the stumbles. There was a big hole in the floor and another ceiling, and sticking up like a post between the two was the middle part of Grandma. Her legs were in the room below, her head in the attic. I'm still going, came the old grouchy voice from up there. Give me another dose, my boy, and let's go through the roof. No, Grandma, no, George called back. You're bursting up the whole house. To heck it with the house, she shouted. I want some fresh air. I hadn't been out for 20 years. But by golly, she is going through the roof, George told himself. He ran downstairs, rushed out the back door into the yard. It would be simply awful, he thought, if she bashed up the roof as well. His father would be furious, and George, would get the blame. He had made the medicine. He had given her too much. Don't come through the roof, Grandma, he prayed. Please not.